Welcome. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the 46th Annual Distinguished Teaching Award for 2011. My name is Steve Welter, and tonight I'll be trying to shepherd this process along. I'm the current chair of the Committee on Teaching, and to be frank, this ceremony is one of my absolutely most favorite events of the year. For I think one of the nicest parts about this is that it really highlights the humanity of the university, and it gives us a chance to show maybe a very different side than the other faces that we often show the rest of the community. You know, sometimes as members of the university, or maybe even as members of society, we feel like we get a lot of mixed messages. But I think tonight, one of the things that I really like is the message is very clear, it's very unwavering, and it's very joyous. And that message, at least in this room, always is that we value teaching, and that we honor students, and we honor our commitments to students, and that the belief that whatever we give back in teaching comes back manyfold to the instructor, I think, is certainly one of the themes that echoes through almost all the presentations and the videos that you'll see today. So the campus awarded the very first one in 1959, and we've had 239 faculty from almost 53 departments get the award. And the range has been exceptional in terms of assistant professors or lecturers or full professors. And it runs across the span of disciplines, whether or not they're physical sciences or biological, social, or humanities. Excellence in teaching is not the domain of one area. And in fact, tonight what we're going to show you is three very different, but three equally excellent instructors. So with that, I'm going to switch, and I'm going to introduce quickly our Vice Chancellor, Executive Vice Chancellor and Provost, George Breslauer. Over the years, I've had a chance to interact with George on some committees. I've also had a chance to see him in student meetings, and I've had a chance to watch some of his guidance as far as our campus goes. You know, we're obviously facing some pretty tough times, and it's hard to find resources these days. But if you look at the pattern of resources, the way they're flowing, and if you look at the pattern for the formation of gateway courses and the protection of funding for those choke points sometimes for freshmen, if you look at the allocation to foreign language programs, and if you look at the general allocation of funding, I think it's very clear. I can say not only do we have a very adept administrator, but I believe we have a very sincere friend of teaching. George, if you'd please come up.
Thank you, Steve, for those very kind words. It is indeed the case that we have been highly dedicated to maintaining and improving the teaching enterprise on campus, and that we've felt that at a time of necessarily rising student tuition, the least we can do is vigorously increase the investment in the curriculum in order to make the opportunities be available for those students who are paying higher fees to get into the courses they need, the majors they need in a timely fashion, and not have to fulfill, for example, an R&C requirement in their last semester on campus. I mean, that just struck us as nonsensical. We also, by the way, when the Chancellor was here last year, he spoke a bit about the undergraduate teaching collegium that he wanted to found here at Berkeley, which would entail a series of heavily endowed chairs filled by outstanding teachers, the proceeds from which would be used to improve teaching, and the interaction among the members of the collegium would be used to brainstorm about ways to innovate in teaching. And we're very pleased to inform you now that we have already filled 6 such chairs. That is to say, we have already funded 6 such chairs. The appointments to them have not necessarily taken place as yet. Most recently, 2 of our members of our Board of Trustees, Judy Webb and just 2 days ago, Georgia Lee, made pledges to fund 2 more collegium chairs. Judy Webb in whatever field the best teacher be found, Georgia Lee in physics. This has been something that the Chancellor has led in terms of finding individuals that were receptive to this message. And to fill 6 of them in 1 year is really, I think, a testimony to the power of that message when you send it out to the community. The idea that we are seeking to upgrade the quality of the teaching campus-wide and to honor the best teachers campus-wide is something that resonates with a lot of prospective donors. So if any of you know someone who might have both the capacity and the prospective enthusiasm to fund such a chair, the collegium is open. 6 is not the end state. And just let us know. Drop us an email if there's a prospect, and we'll talk with you about strategies along those lines. You know, I've been at Berkeley now on the faculty since 1971, so I've seen a lot over time. And I recall one of my colleagues back in the late 1970s saying to me, "Remember, George, this is not a loving institution." And that was supposed to make me feel better. I wasn't exactly sure why, but it's a big exception to that at the time was the Distinguished Teaching Award, going on since, as Steve mentioned, 1959, with 239 recipients. This was an inspired institution to begin the process of honoring our greatest teachers. I would also say that, well, I served for 7 years as Dean of Social Sciences and so far for 5 years as Provost, and I've probably read 800 to 1,000 merit or promotion cases. And contrary to what you sometimes hear out in the polemics, the not good teacher is very much the exception at Berkeley. It is really striking to read about the quality of the teaching and the student response to that high quality teaching. There are, of course, exceptions, but the norm is very good teaching. And what we're doing now in a campus with 1,400 to 1,500 faculty members, the norm in which is very good teaching, we are honoring those who are spectacular, exceptional, standing out in an already very good crowd, and giving of their skills and their enthusiasm in ways that are over and above. Now, the 3 recipients this year who will be introduced, so I'm not going to scoop anybody's comments that will follow. They represent the best of Berkeley. They're renowned researchers, they're participants in the life of the community, and they're teachers who inspire their students. I want to go back to that renowned researcher component, because sometimes you hear people say, yeah, well, if you're a great teacher, you're probably not a very good researcher. On the contrary, a few years ago, a former recipient of this award, Dave Patterson, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, did a little mini study of the correlation between the research accomplishments and professional stature of those who won the Distinguished Teaching Award and the fact that they had won the Distinguished Teaching Award. And he demonstrated that the winners of our Distinguished Teaching Award are also among our most distinguished researchers. And that, I think, is quite a testimony to Berkeley. It's quite a testimony to the people we recruit, the people we nurture, and a testimony to the culture of this institution. In addition, good teaching is not a Lone Ranger act. Good teaching is a collaborative effort. It's a team effort. Departmental staff and excellent students are partners with the teachers in this enterprise. I mean, there's another myth out there that the teaching award winners must be just great entertainers or performers. But when you look at the student evaluations, you realize that's not true. Students clearly know the difference between an entertainer and a good teacher. A typical comment for these 3 winners today is, this course was demanding, best class I've ever had. Students also comment on these individuals' passion, their knowledge, their clear desire that students think and learn, their availability, their patience, their openness, their flexibility. These are all common comments in the evaluations of these individuals as teachers. Most importantly, students also recognize an ineffable quality and a transformational quality in good teaching. Quote, tied loose ends together magically. Quote, everyone goes into class confused and comes out enlightened. Quote, this course has transformed the way I think about the field. That's what a university is about, transformation. Now, there's a risk to being a great teacher. One student wrote, I want you to know that the administration listens to students. Geisler is so good, he needs to teach more often. So Phillip, we've arranged for you to teach 3 additional courses this fall. I salute you. I express from my own heart and from that of the Chancellor, who is now on an airplane to China, going for 8 days to China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Indonesia, and then coming home with the bacon, presumably. He sends you his highest regard, as do I. Congratulations.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Fiona Doyle, who is also the current chair of the UC Berkeley Division of the Academic Senate. And I also would maybe give her the title of maybe faculty shepherd, as she's trying to keep us safe in some pretty tumultuous times. Fiona?
Thank you. That's a new one. It's mother hen I get more often. Without a doubt, like Steve said, participating in this celebration is really one of the high points of my year as serving as chair of the Berkeley Division. And during this year, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out for myself why Berkeley is so extraordinarily excellent as an institution, when if you look at all of the external factors that are weighing upon us, you would expect us to have been driven to a lesser status. Certainly an important component of our excellence is our academic personnel system, which has formally embedded into it analysis of teaching. But I think you have to go to a broader level to really understand our excellence. Our reputation is based on the experiences of our students, the impressions that visitors to our community take away, and our impact on the world. And all of these benefit immeasurably from the fact that we have truly internalized the importance of good teaching. We don't view teaching as a chore. We understand the synergy between teaching and research, and we understand the impact that good teaching has on our students, both their immediate well-being and the long-term benefits of their time at Berkeley. And at a more fundamental level, good teaching resonates with the quintessential Berkeley characteristic of caring for the community and the impact that we have on the world. This awards ceremony is a measure of the high regard that Berkeley has for teaching. Colleagues within the departments, the Senate Committee on Teaching, and the Office of Educational Development put a huge amount of effort into preparing and evaluating nominations and organizing this wonderful event because they think it's a good use of their time. What better thing to do than to celebrate incredible accomplishment in teaching? I agree, and I thank all of these individuals sincerely for their efforts. So in this context, I'm honored to be part of this ceremony, celebrating the dedication and achievements of 3 extraordinary teachers, along with the accomplishments of so many of the earlier recipients of this award who are here. On behalf of the Academic Senate, I congratulate each and every one of you, and thank you for your indelible contributions to our community.
Every year we produce a video that attempts to capture the magic that we saw in the classroom, that we heard in the students' evaluations. And every year, to be frank, I'm moved. I'm often humbled, which is not a trait that hits faculty very often. And but I would say more importantly that I'm inspired. And I hope you feel the same after you see our video this year.
My first lecture class that I ever walked into, I couldn't believe there were that many people sitting in a room prepared to listen to me.
That's what gives the book its structure.
I was so surprised that instead of doing what I have done ever since, which is to stand up and talk, I decided it would be best just to sit down behind the table, which doesn't work when there are 60 people in the room.
I had stayed up all night writing my first lectures ever, so I was exhausted and barely able to stand up. And I had readers for my class who knew more about the subject than I did, and it was pretty terrifying.
These two coexistence temperatures, they're changing. It's a strange experience when you walk into a room and you realize that people are prepared to respect you and you haven't done anything to earn it yet. What's our guiding principle going to be? It was tempting to me to try and act like someone who commanded respect, and that's not who I am.
When I would feel myself venturing into territory that I was not completely in control of, it was very hard to know what to do next.
This is really important. On the one hand, again, it creates the sense of depth.
Over the years, what's been most productive for me is just to realize that getting to places where things are less comfortable for me is actually really productive, not only for me, but also for my students.
New Deal liberalism was about the economy.
I learned just that I didn't have to really impress them because they were impressed before I walked into the room, because they were at Cal.
Yet we're able to work together.
I knew all this cool stuff, and they wanted to know it too.
I lowered my guard, and I noticed that they lowered their guard, and that the conversation then became so much easier. The chemical potential is way above that of liquid water. In a sense, I gave up the default respect that you get walking into the room, but I did exploit something else, which is that students' standards for professorial humor are exceedingly low. You know how I love my props in my demonstrations, so I brought a prop that's completely new for me. I brought a novel. When they can have fun with something, I know there's a connection. And it may just be the beginning of a connection, but it's something to build on.
I do really enjoy myself in the classroom, and I think that comes across.
An exquisitely and acutely sympathetic first-person narrator.
One of the things I enjoy is that I don't know where it's all going, that there is a kind of danger to the thing, that I'm going to hear my students say things that I didn't expect. I'm going to hear myself saying things that I didn't expect to say.
If I'm not engaging them, if they're not bringing something to the table, if we're not both pouring our hearts into it, then it's an exercise. How much freedom do we have to tune the thermodynamic state of the system? If they're going to connect with how I know things, then they're going to go through the same excitement, the same surprise, the same frustration when they can't get something to work. I want to stir up the way they're thinking, and when we can get to a level where there's nothing in between their desire to understand and the knowledge and the material itself, then things are easy.
One of the things I do is show them how excited I am.
Look, there's poverty in the United States.
At first, I think they're kind of bewildered by this, jumping around and but they get it. They get why I'm so excited about these things.
Set limits.
I think they see me doing it, And it is a kind of licensing.
That moment where across a table, two people, right, reading from different places, reading with different backgrounds, different levels of training, nonetheless land on that same moment.
They've come upon something deep and something important and knowledge that they didn't have before. When they reveal that, it's like opening a birthday present.
And without that engagement, you can't be great at anything. And our students are going to be great at things, all kinds of things.
What I would like to see happen coming out of a particular class is I would like for us as a group to agree that the conversations we've had, the level of intensity that we've brought, has made them different.
That everything is embedded in context, that no set of facts stands alone.
Saying that segregation was unconstitutional.
That the world is a complicated place, and that anyone who tells you it isn't is lying to you.
Deferring compensation and
To question, not out of meanness, but to be critical and skeptical of things that they hear, and to postpone true acceptance of that until they've seen a compelling demonstration.
It pays to pay really close attention to things.
It's working to make a complicated world meaningful.
That's incredibly important to understanding how books work, how ideas work. But I think it's also incredibly important to understanding how the world works.
That the world, again, is made meaningful.
The fact that they know that connection is there, I think makes them more grounded intellectually in general. It makes them more confident in the things they know because they know not just how to do them, they know why they do them.
this was a freedom that government would protect.
These are students who will never, ever meet a historian again, and who never, ever will have the chance to have these things explained to them. And they want to know.
They want to know in greater depth how to think about the material, what the implications are. Often it's when they've understood something and then gone to the next level of thinking about how does this pertain to my research or things that I care about in the world that are different from what we've discussed in class.
All of these little things not only add up to a term paper or to a class or even to a college education, but they start to add up to a way of life. One of the things that's amazing to me about teaching these classes is that I get this incredible opportunity just to talk to smart people who are interested in things that I'm interested in for a living.
That seems real.
It keeps us young intellectually. It keeps us away from a sense that we understand everything. And it constantly brings me the feeling that there's so much I don't understand. And that's always true, but it's easy without that to be content with the things you understand.
My students allow me to think out loud with them.
The CIO had played a vital role.
The students raise questions that propel me in different directions, lead me to research questions that I hadn't thought of before. That's where original work comes from. That's where original research comes from.
Every time I teach a class, there's a moment when I have this sort of slightly out-of-body experience where I wonder why everyone doesn't just get up and leave. You know, I mean, there's no thing that keeps us there. We just agree somehow to sit in this room for an hour and a half talking about a novel or a poem. We just agree to do it. We stay because there's something special about that time.
In developing intellectual connections, when things work, we have a bond. The reason I strive to teach well is because I value the students. I value what they've invested in learning things from me. It's not because it's my job. The reason I pour effort into teaching is that I want to do well by them.
And they're grateful for it, and not just from me, also from their fellow students. They can be awed by each other every bit as much as I can be awed by them. Oh, I'm so proud of our students. Oh, they're wonderful. They're wonderful.
can never stretch out a yay moment too long. That's good. Anyway, I'm very honored to have had the chance to introduce our three distinguished teachers today. For those who don't know the award, it's our highest award that we can possibly offer on our campus that identifies distinguished teaching. But for me, it's actually the highest award. I think it's a recognition from your peers, it's a recognition from your students, and it's often a recognition from a broader community that you've stepped up beyond just what we think of the normal high standards of teaching to something superb, that you're able to stimulate the curiosity of your students, that you're able to engage them in a broader process, maybe of discovery of self-awareness or where their place is in history and in the society in general, as well as that there are significant relationships between our whole institution and the world at large. And as George alluded to, excellence in teaching goes hand in hand with excellence in scholarships. And then as part of our process, we also evaluate where they stand in terms of their own scholarships, and all three of these have clearly done superbly in that category as well. The selection process is long, it's rigorous, it's an academic dogfight at times. The number of people who are nominated is really quite high, and the people we have to pass over are really excellent. So to be up here, they had to do something different, they had to do something exceptional, and the process itself, let me explain to you briefly sort of how it goes. We have a two-stage process. The first stage requires a nomination letter from the chair. It requires student evaluations. It requires a history of the courses they've taught, the diversity of the courses they've taught, their grade distribution, as well as their quantitative scores. That's the first cut, and that's a difficult one. The second stage is we've picked the ones that we believe might be able to go forward for the award. And at that stage, we require then more courses. We require more evaluations. We then ask students, we ask their colleagues, ex-graduate students to write letters as outside reviews. We ask them to write a teaching statement as well. And then the final gauntlet is that every single member of the committee then attends every single one of their courses. So it's not a checklist, but it's really a review in its entirety. And one of the things that it says really pleased me, if not shocked me, is that despite the differences on our committee, as far as our disciplines, our approaches, our teaching styles, is that there seems to be a consensus that ultimately shakes out that the top people are clearly the top candidates on everybody's list. The committee works exceptionally hard of trying to get it right. And even though we focus on very different elements, some are more quantitative, some are more qualitative, at the end of the day, somehow we circle back to the same names. You know, the other thing that's interesting about the committee that I want to also briefly mention is that the committee works on a lot of teaching issues above and beyond the Distinguished Teaching Award, because I'd like to acknowledge our committee as well. And sort of that diversity in our committee is interesting because if different issues have emerged, in fact, we had one just come up about a week ago. And when I brought it up to the committee, they expressed horror at what was being proposed. And as bad as that was, when they finally realized that I wasn't in horror, they were even more horrified. So eventually I reconciled myself to the yet another moment of disappointment in someone's eyes. But I've been married for almost 38 years, so I'm okay with that. The reality is that I realized is that it was a very good thing that it happened there. Is that it's with the challenges that are facing our university now, is that there are a lot of people who are standing at different points of concern. And we don't all pick the same point. But one thing that was clear is that every member approached their point of defense, if you will, with great passion, with a commitment to go to the mat if necessary. And for me, that makes us feel very good about the way the university is going to go. I do believe we're going to get through this in the end, and I have confidence we'll do it without serious damage in the process. So I'd like to introduce our committee members, if I could, please. And if you could hold your applause to the very end, would be terrific. So Claire Kramsch from German and Education. We have Linda Williams from Film, Andy Stewart from Art, History, and Classics, Mac Horton from East Asian Languages, Andrew Packard from Mechanical Engineering, and who also will be next year's chair of the Committee on Teaching and who will be sharing the podium with me today, Carl Brito from French, and then two students, Jennifer Yunking Chen and Eileen Kim. If you would, please. They really did a terrific job, and I wish you could have seen it because it's a tremendous amount of work, but it was work that they seemed to take with great relish and certainly with great concern. But it gives me pleasure now as I'm actually going to switch to our first candidate, not candidate, actually winner of the distinguished, yeah, no take-backs, is Professor Robin Einhorn. So Dr. Einhorn is a full professor in the Department of History. And I'd like to actually lead, if I can, with the chair, a letter from the chair from her department. Robin Einhorn is a teacher of genius who is responsible for the most important gateway course in the history department, the history of the U.S. from the Civil War to the present. But we had that in our flyer. What we didn't do was the second sentence, and it says, Einhorn previously taught the second most important gateway course, U.S. history from colonial times to the Civil War. So clearly the history department had figured out they'd found a gold mine, and a twofer would even be better. Her commitments to teaching go beyond the classroom with service on the Committee on Courses, for review of the Subject A, for the UC Committee on Preparatory Education, but also her extensive work as an academic advisor to the Oakland Unified School District from 2005 to present. So she's obviously reaching beyond the classroom and looking to give back to a broader community in terms of her work with collaboration on program development and grant writing, as well as numerous lectures with the teachers and finding other faculty to participate in this program. As I mentioned earlier, as a member of the DTA committee, you have the privilege to attend their classes. And every one of them is excellent, but not all of them are necessarily winners. But to be frank, when I went to her first lecture, I was a little bit distressed. Her topic for the, don't worry. Her topic for the day focused on the evolution of automobiles and how they drove the evolution of America, economically, politically, and socially. She discussed how autos had allowed people to suddenly move beyond their normal spheres, take trips to national parks, stay in motels, be in the back of a station wagon for hours fighting with your brothers and sisters as you went to see the second largest ball of twine in the US. In essence, she described my life, and I thought I recognized myself, in fact, in one of the photos. The part I didn't like was all of a sudden, I was old. She was supposed to be teaching ancient things, and all of a sudden I was in her class. It turns out I was wrong, though, and that Dr. Einhorn's message was much larger than that, and that history emerges, that history provides us with insights that have not only shaped us as a society, but provides a blueprint for how we're supposed to solve our problems. Her students are challenged, and I think if you listen to all your speakers or the videos, you'll see that all of them are constantly pressing their students to analyze facts, to contextualize the situation, and reveal for themselves the mechanisms driving these situations. But rather than attempt to paraphrase it poorly, let me read her personal teaching statement. The point is not, this is from her now, the point is not just to illustrate contrast between past and present, but demonstrate that institutions have changed by exploring how this has been done in the past. For me, Robin, effective teaching extends beyond imparting information and developing skills. It requires personal contact. I am finding that many of them enter UCB after being taught what I consider a complete falsehood, that a detached and relativistic attitude is the only sophisticated or polite approach to a diverse multicultural world, but I combat this idea with all my teachings. One freshman captured the problem beautifully when she asked if I wanted her opinions on the essay, and I said, no, you've studied the evidence, I want your judgment. Now, whether or not she was successful, I think is maybe supported by the statement that one of her students wrote in their review, and that she said, it has been the course that I hope to remember continually as I leave this university and I begin to try to understand my own place in society. Clearly the students have got the message that history imparts place for us and gives us a guidepost to the future. As far as their teaching style, I'd like to read from an outside reviewer first, and then I'd like to read from some reviews. The outside reviewer said this: Like students writing evaluations for a semester's worth of Robin's teaching, I find it hard to know where to start. The general impression is one of energy, intellectual but also physical, poured relentlessly into 50 minutes of lecture. And I think we saw a video support of that. From start to finish, the listener confronts a stream of lucidly presented stories engulfed in historical analysis, at the end of which one is not so much exhausted as exhilarated by the extensive intellectual engagement. One of her students writes, this was a wonderful class, one of the best I've taken at Berkeley. I am a graduating senior, and I'm so glad I got the chance to take a class from Dr. Einhorn, because of her enthusiasm, her passion, her knowledge, her storytelling have truly made my last semester one to remember. The second student, I'll read two more, is I believe Professor Einhorn should have her own TV show titled American History. there's like nothing better than a TV show. So I feel she may have just got the ultimate prize. But truthfully, this last quote is maybe my favorite in 3 years. And the person says, "I'm not even in this class, but I come every Monday and Wednesday for the lectures." It's that good a class. You gotta love them. And the other thing I would like to read from a couple candidates is from our committee members themselves, because this is not one where a letter of hyperbole is required, where maybe a chair juices it up a little bit. This is from one of our own committee members in their review of Robin's program. And it said, "She did a marvelous job of weaving together multiple strands of political, social, and economic history, while maintaining clarity, not to mention the rapt attention of hundreds of lower division students," which I assume implies it's harder. "She had a truly extraordinary ability to highlight crucial facts and concepts without sacrificing her lecture's complexity and narrative flow." I'm kind of a numbers guy, so I'd like to support it one more time. In the end, really, numbers never lie. So she was asked to teach what is sometimes the killer course, which is the introductory course that's required, and often students are very disengaged from it. But from fall '06 to present, the students rose in attendance every year from 304 to ultimately 544 students. Her average score for those 4 years was 6.5, and the range ran from 6.5 to 6.65. So clearly it's every year, high quality, high standards, and the students felt it, and they responded by taking the course. So I returned to the course the next time to see it one more time and to make an announcement, and I was feeling a little better because when I walked in, I thought the students were rocking to Eric Clapton's Cocaine and Bob Springsteen's Badlands, and I thought I felt young again, and I walked up to her and I said, "Hey, the students are really enjoying themselves," and she said, "No, actually, I like to play period music." So the magic once again slid away. But in that course, she mentioned that there was rampant inflation, runaway oil prices, corrupt politicians, oil spills, and international wars. And I thought, thank God this is all in the past. Truthfully, I think perhaps it is time for all of us to take Professor Einhorn's course, and if not us, at least our politicians. Professor Einhorn was not teaching history, but instead she was showing us a broader way to think about life. And I want to close with this. As one student put it when referring to her course, he said, "History comes alive." But I'm going to venture a guess that actually Professor Einhorn would say, "History is alive." Professor Einhorn. I'm going to do this here. Thanks.
Thanks. You guys don't know, but we can't see any of you. The lights are completely blinding. All right. Okay, that helps some. So we were really pleased to have survived the video, and then you did that. So, okay. And Ernest, thank you. This is really very humbling. Not least for the reasons you've already been told, which is that Cal is filled with great teachers. And I know that because my students have told me that for my entire career. When I first arrived, I'd be in my office and I'd get this stream of students coming in telling me how my colleagues had changed their lives. So a lot of thank you here. I guess I start with my family. My mother taught 4th grade for many years, a very difficult job. And my father taught history at the dinner table, particularly, I think, because of his deep sense. I've never actually asked him, but this will be on YouTube, so. Because of his deep sense of the ways in which the events and the catastrophes of the 20th century had shaped our lives. That's what I think was going on. More specifically, I want to thank 3 groups, starting with my colleagues, David Johnson, and others who worked so hard to make this happen for me. You've been told about this process. It's unbelievable. And as I've suggested, my colleagues have modeled great teaching for me my entire career, not least Professor Leon Litwack is here today, whose example in teaching 7B, yeah. Now, those are some shoes to fill, and I'm not there. Anyway, secondly, my GSIs over the years. I have had incredibly talented GSIs who really make me look good. And they make me look good by translating for me with the small class kind of attention that you can't do in lecture, and with feedback. They tell me what works, they tell me what doesn't. And then, of course, the students. Some of you wrote for me, for which I'm very grateful, and the committee read a lot of happy evaluations. But mainly, I'm grateful to the students because you've made me a good teacher in the first place. Starting with graduate students, teaching in the #1 history department in the country my entire career. Sometimes we're only tied for first, but you know. Means I've had the very best graduate students that there are. And this really shows in everything you do and everything you say. And I've learned tremendous amounts from you and continue to every day in every seminar. And then we have the undergraduates, which is the largest debt. Teaching you is such a great responsibility. It's awesome to see really big talents in raw and relatively undeveloped stage. It's literally an awesome task to be worthy of it. And the way you teach me day in and day out, you watch me so closely. If I flag for a second, I see it in your eyes. But especially when something works, I can see you thinking along with me, even in a large lecture hall, and really nothing beats that. But I think my job today is also to say something about teaching. What makes successful teaching? And I've been thinking about that more in the last few weeks than ever before, so here it is, here's the secret. Okay, there is no secret. You have to know your stuff, you have to prepare, what's the best way to explain things. Experience is helpful, what worked in the past. Genuine feedback is critical, and in my department, the feedback we get in evaluations is paragraphs written over the years in what my department calls narrative evaluations, otherwise known as blank sheets of paper. And so I've really, the students have really been able to tell me what they think. What to improve and what worked. Still, if teaching Cal students is hard in some ways, you've got Cal students in the room, so you've got to be on your game. It's also one of the easier teaching jobs that I can imagine because of the freedom we have in our classrooms. As Steve mentioned, I've worked for 10 years with primary and secondary school teachers in a federal program called the Teaching American History Grant, mostly with Oakland Unified. And I've got to say, they're the real heroes of education in this country. They work under conditions of fundamental disrespect, incessant testing, highly detailed standards, supervision that seems to be designed to take the humanity out of the equation. That is the formula for mediocrity. And still, they are incredible. They're idealistic, earnest, hardworking, and very talented. There's a tendency in our culture to see something we like and then to measure it minutely, quantify it so we can replicate it endlessly. Teaching is not something we can treat that way. It is a fundamentally human endeavor, and it is most successful when it is most free. The freedom essential to learning necessarily includes a freedom to see the world in our own way, which might be different from the way someone else sees it. As a scholar of history, I know some things about the past that are different from what our culture says about it, how the mass media presents it. My job is to teach those things and to teach how I came to know them, but especially to give students the tools to ask why, always why, and to understand what is evidence and what isn't, and the differences between judgments, opinions, and ideology. I want them to believe whatever you decide is true about how the world works and how it became what it is, but to do it in ways that I've seen Cal students do countless times, with panache, with brilliance. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of that triumph, not to mention honoring me for loving this job. Thanks.
Thank you, Robin. My name is Andy Packard. I'm on the Committee on Teaching, as Steve mentioned, and I'll be introducing our next awardee. So I have the honor of introducing next awardee, Professor Phillip Geissler from the Department of Chemistry. Phil's an associate professor in chemistry. Phil's been on the faculty here for about 8 years now. In terms of undergraduate education, Phil is responsible for the upper division physical chemistry, or P-Chem course, 120B, simply entitled Physical Chemistry. 120B is a required course in the curriculum with a large enrollment. It's heavy on math and theory and does not have a lab. So a significant proportion of the students don't look forward to taking the course, at least that's what they think as they enter it. Phil acknowledges it can be a hard sell. As he says in his statement, physical chemistry is not traditionally considered a fun subject. So the students' hesitancy is very apparent from the evaluations, many of which start like, I was a committed experimental organic chemist not looking forward to 120B. Or 120B ranked extremely low on my list of interests and I was not enthused about this intractable subject. What's amazing, though, is how quickly and consistently Phil hooks them. Here's the second sentence from those same evaluations. By the third class, I was on the fence about my organic chem career choice. And Professor Geisler won me over with his contagious excitement. He is adamant that anyone can learn P-Chem. Thanks to his superb teaching, I think he's right. And many other evaluations express the same sentiment. Not my favorite subject, but definitely my favorite class. Saw that a lot. And even the understated, I don't hate P-Chem anymore. Professor Geisler's evaluation scores on teaching effectiveness, oh, by the way, that's 6.7. I think you need to know what the max is. Most of you probably do, but it's not 10. It's 7. So just to put it in context there. Professor Geisler's evaluation scores on teaching effectiveness and coursework for this class are also simply off scale. And as the nomination letter from the chemistry department points out, unlike anything they've ever seen, even with their own impressive list of distinguished teaching awardees. How does he do it? Phil's teaching statement reads, having fun with a serious subject may well be the essence of my teaching philosophy. I strive to recreate the excitement of my own learning experiences, to be respectful but playfully irreverent, in ways that help students lower their guard and to converse with students as intellectual equals. Letters and evaluations also point to just unyielding dedication. Lecture preparation is a key, of course. A former PhD student in GSI remarks, Professor Geisler makes his courses completely original. Lectures are an independent and complementary narrative to the textbook. A recent grad talks about the lasting value of the lectures. In 10 years of college, I've transcribed and saved lecture notes from 4 classes. 2 of these are from the 2 classes I had with Professor Geisler. So that's good. Many students laud his general office hours where he patiently provides constructive guidance while still allowing freedom for the students to learn problem solving and do the creative thinking themselves. The Distinguished Award nominations also often come with supporting material from courses such as homework assignments, handouts, and exams that we get to look at. Now, over the years, we've all written exams that we're very proud of. But I was humbled when I looked at the 120B final exam that was included in Phil's packet. You know those rare times when you come across something that you don't fully understand, but you can just tell it's good. It's really good, just looking at it, and it's a hunch. So this exam had an extraordinary look and feel to it. It seemed clear, fair, challenging, and empowering all at the same time. So I started looking for some evidence that my hunch was true. And it didn't take me very long to find this. So a former PhD student and now MD writes, he designs tests and problem sets that afford students the opportunity to have their own eureka moment upon solving a challenging problem. A Harvard postdoc supplied the final nugget that I needed. I would even describe the exams as elegant and beautiful. They required a lot of thought and effort, but once solved, I appreciated how the basic principles of the course had helped me figure out these seemingly complex and involved problems from areas of research not even covered in the course. So beautiful exams and perfectly crafted lectures. But it's more than that, though. In 120B, that dreaded mathematical treatment of statistical mechanics, Phil's ability to demystify the abstract clearly shows through. Students feel Phil is uniquely talented at conveying these ideas and building up their intuition, an especially difficult task given the abstruse and hard to visualize nature of the material. One writes, Professor Geisler occasionally uses a perfect degree of silliness to stimulate interest, convey an idea, and help us forever lock on the message. In this context, I've heard that Phil's depiction of a particle behaving as a wave is something not to be missed. So mostly what I've just described related to Phil's ability to connect and transform a wide cross-section of undergraduate chemistry students. His dedication to mentoring, though, goes far beyond the classroom. Many of his former students, BS and PhD and MS, wrote about this and the subsequent respect they have for him. I'll quote 3. Studying chemistry in graduate school is not any easier than in undergrad, but when times get tough, I can remind myself that back in Berkeley, there is someone who believed in me, taught me well, and inspired me to persevere. At a school this large, I thought I'd become just another anonymous number in a crowd of thousands. I am so glad I was wrong. The presence of a selfless teacher like Professor Geisler made the campus smaller and my time at UCB a treasured experience. And finally, from I believe a former PhD student, I speak without exaggeration when I say that taking his classes and having him as a teacher, a mentor, and a friend were the biggest factors that made my Berkeley experience special. So I could go on and on and on, but I think the message is clear. However, I do want to close by addressing 3 specific evaluation comments. Most of these came with exclamation points. Give him tenure. Well, it's done. The always intriguing and slightly dangerous, are you single? No. And give this man several teaching awards. Well, in 2005, Phil received the Department of Chemistry Teaching Award, so today we make that 2, and who knows how many more to go. So ladies and gentlemen, Professor Phillip Geisler.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. It's so flattering, it's almost hard to talk. It's honestly difficult to feel deserving of the company this award places me in, but I'm getting a lot of help with that challenge from my family and friends, students and colleagues, and most recently, Andy. For the first time in over a decade, my email inbox is teeming with messages that I'm not eager to delete. The award itself means a great deal to me. Belonging to a community that places such value on what it represents means even more. Yet you might not recognize that value in listening to everyday conversations. If you spend time with faculty, you hear a lot of grumbling about how much time and effort it takes to teach a class that's worthy of Berkeley standards. Just ask my wife, Rebecca. Yeah. If you hang around undergraduates, you hear about how much time and effort is required to do well in these classes. And if you talk to graduate students, well, then you get to hear both complaints. Why do we do this to each other? Couldn't we, say, sign a secret truce and just tell parents and legislators that we go through the exercise of lectures, assignments, and exams? It sounds great. Professors could spend more time advancing their research agendas. Students could spend more time loitering on Facebook. You might find a few people on campus who would agree to this devil's bargain. Between you and me, they belong at Stanford. The vast majority of us enter the fray willingly, sacrificing sleep and time with friends and family, not just to do the hard work of teaching and learning, but to do it as well as we can. And I think it's worthwhile to ask why. I think the answer has a lot to do with Berkeley is not a vocational school. The purpose of the classes we teach is not to provide students with standard tools to be applied in prescribed ways. Berkeley is instead a place where new ideas are hatched, they're nurtured, vetted, and brought to bear on the world. And it's for love of this process and its results and all of the human and intellectual dimensions that we give up comfort and peace of mind so regularly. Teaching is an aspect of this endeavor every bit as important as our research agendas. When I'm teaching, I don't feel like I'm outfitting the next generation of chemists. I imagine something much more like airlifting them into the front lines of scientific inquiry and providing medical support when their minds are blown. What Berkeley students accomplish in this setting and the fun they have doing it is freshly inspiring every time I teach. So I'll close with a tornado of thanks. First to my students for maintaining such a consistently low standard of humor in the classroom, and for friendships that only get stronger after grades have been assigned. To my scientific big brothers, Matt Francis, a previous awardee, Dan Fletcher, probably a future awardee, and Jeff Neaton, who have provided much needed encouragement to do things my own way. To my actual big brother, Fritz, who provided much the same support during my childhood. Fritz flew here from Virginia last night, quite possibly to make sure I give him credit for teaching me multiplication tables at a precociously young age, so credit is given. To my teaching assistants for their many remarkable efforts and endless patience. And to my administrative assistant, Lisa Littlejohn, who is single-handedly responsible for whatever shreds of sanity I have left at this point in the semester. To my colleagues and my research group for a bounty of friendship, mentoring, and collaboration. To my wife for not just tolerating, but even smiling upon irrational behavior like staying up until 3 a.m. to rework a perfectly serviceable lecture. To my PhD advisor, longtime mentor, colleague, friend, cheerleader, and I'm now proud to also say student, David Chandler. Much of the liveliness of my courses stems from my personal relationship with the subject of physical chemistry. The perspective I take on this material and many of the ways I explain it are, in fact, his. Behind every award-receiving teacher like me, I think there must be a great teacher like him. To my parents, the only people who can rightly take credit or blame for the ways I connect with other people. My father can only be here in memory and spirit, and he certainly is. My mother also flew in from Virginia to be here tonight, although her recent advice on teaching has mainly involved trying to delegate more work to the GSIs. The joy I take in leading people to new understanding certainly is something I inherited from her. To my grandmother, who will almost certainly be the first person to watch this event on YouTube. And finally, thanks to all of you for being part of such a wonderful occasion. Thank you.
Well, it's my honor to present our last recipient of the Distinguished Teaching Award, who is Kent Puckett. So Kent is a distinguished narrative theorist and specialist in the British and French 19th century novel. He's an associate professor who received tenure in 2008. In his letter, his chair described him as a fairly young scholar. So clearly there's been changes in his life. He got tenure, and then he had to transition from being young to fairly young. His scholarship is exceptional, with an outside reviewer in his tenure case referring to him as good as the very best of his generation, not only in his field, but in any field, when he referenced one of his works. His outside engagements beyond the classroom has been extensive as well. He's the director of undergrad studies in the English department and co-director of the interdisciplinary minor in human rights. And he also finds time for interacting with undergrads as an outside advisor and sort of confidant. According to his chair, Dr. Puckett has taught some of the most challenging courses in the English department, including 7 different undergraduate courses since 2002. His course titled Introduction to Literary Theory was described as a topic that students at all levels approach with anxiety, if not aversion. Of course, I might add that this course that is so highly feared, he ultimately received a course of 6.6 out of 7 from a class of almost 100 people. The chair goes on to then say Kent has made a huge contribution to students' tolerance for difficulty, their love of a good challenge, and the shapeliness and discipline of their thought. In fact, his average scores for all 16 of the courses that he submitted was also 6.5. So you can see the pattern that's emerging here with all of our people is that they're having exceptionally high scores and with exceptional consistency. Now, I want to draw upon some of the comments from some of his students, and it says his command of literary theory is absolutely stunning, and he has a true gift for clarifying text, facilitating discussions, and motivating discourse, even when the material itself seems to work against fluid conversation. Clearly, all the students, I would say, a good fraction of them, referred to the difficulty of the course and the confusing nature at times of the course, but that in the end, a broader understanding emerged from that. Another student goes on to say he paces his class well enough to leave the students scribbling breathlessly to grab as much of his brilliance as possible. Overall, A+++, which I'm assuming is 2 better than an A+. And it says, I'm pretty sure that everyone in the class had a crush on his genius. Another student writes, every second of lecture was filled with insight. Each class I came away with a new interest and a view of the reading. And the last one I believe we referred to is, even with the topics such as paranoid interpretation / non-objective, which I don't understand, everyone goes into the class confused, which would be me, but comes out enlightened. So clearly there's this clear intellectual challenge that seems to weave through all of his courses. But Kent seemed to be also able to connect at a very personal level. Another student goes on to say, best of all, even though he is funny, nice, and a genuine professor, he's also the very first professor I could ever view as a person as well. I didn't know how to take that myself, but he's very popular. So often his office hours weren't long enough to accommodate every waiting student. And then what the last one said is perhaps what is the most refreshing thing about the professor is that he really cares about his students and their thoughts and their feelings. So clearly he's connecting in a way that obviously I think is integral to a lot of the teaching programs. So I also wanted to give you a couple comments from our review committee, which again I'd like to reemphasize is not an easy group to please. But one of the people on the committee said, after reviewing his file, said, Kent is the kind of teacher I would like to be. And by the way, this is also a Distinguished Teaching Award winner, a gripping speaker and a superb mentor. Another member of our committee said he is the whole package. His teaching philosophy was so insightful that I copied it for my own edification. The lecture was perfectly organized, animatedly presented, and it was a world luminous. But for the last quote I want to give, again from a committee member, I need to tell you that the textbook that was covered in his class was Nicholas Nickleby. So here's what our committee member said. He said, his lecture made me want to like Nicholas Nickleby. Parents, I cordially hate Dickens since I had him shoved down my throat in grammar school. So clearly our committee member was having issues. But in spite of these internal challenges, the same member goes on to say, and describing Kent's lecture as fluent, given without notes, extraordinarily articulate, beautifully argued, clearly structured, funny, brilliantly balancing exposition, analysis, criticism, and theory. I took that as an awfully good review. So as I watched him teach, what I realized that Kent does more than discuss a piece of literature, when in fact he's a storyteller. And that what he does is he seamlessly weaves our lives into the discourse that seems to flow so effortlessly from him. The story was used to raise issues within ourselves, with our way of thinking about the world and our place. When I met him in class afterwards, he told me he'd really enjoyed the process. And when I asked him why, he said it forced him to think more deeply about his teaching. I think if you get a chance, I'd really recommend that you read the teaching statements of all 3 of our winners. They're really quite phenomenal, and they're really quite insightful. What I want to do is read from his, though. And it's just a portion of it, and so it's a little bit out of context. But one of my goals as a teacher is to help my students recognize and make arguments. I try in seminars and lectures explicitly to model making them, which means that we need to abandon paths that seem promising or that we may end up in wonderful and surprising places. As long, though, as we as a class keep in mind that we are always in the midst of a shared process in making arguments and ideas, these arguments and ideas, whether they're airtight or wild and woolly, help make the really difficult work of really free thought all the more possible. And that's actually what you'll find in a lot of the students' comments, is they seem to cherish the ability to work their way through these ideas and has, as someone said, their aha moment. But what I'd like to end with is a quote from one of the students. And he said, honestly, KP, which I assume is Ken, is the man. Just don't let it go to his head. Well, first, I don't think that can happen. And secondly, for tonight, I'd say let's have it go to his head. And perhaps more importantly, let's also have it go to his heart. It's a night of celebration, and I think tonight we can let it roll. Ken?
Needless to say, this is a very humbling and incredible honor. Thank you so much for that, and thank you to all of you who lied in those evaluations. That's very helpful. When I came to Berkeley almost 10 years ago, I came right out of a PhD program, so I hadn't done a whole lot of teaching. So you could say that I not only teach at Berkeley, but I learned to teach at Berkeley. And I've learned the most, I think, from my very, very smart students. In seminars and lectures, in undergraduate and graduate courses, my students and I have thought not only about novels, poems, films, psychoanalysis, and literary theory, but also how to understand the time that we share together under the name teaching. This seems to me one of the weirdest and most important things about teaching, that a group of strangers can get together a few times a week and decide to treat their time differently, to take time to think about books and ideas, to think about how minor things, strange things, random things can turn out to be the most important things when you give them enough of your time. A few weeks ago, my class and I were talking about Alice in Wonderland and the Mad Hatter's riddle, why is a raven like a writing desk? It is notoriously a riddle without an answer. Even so, taking time to answer the riddle and seeing what else we needed to know in order to know where to start began to seem vitally important. Working on that riddle, and I don't mean answering it, but trying to answer it precisely when we knew there was no answer, took us to unexpected places. Darwin's finches, to Poe's philosophy of composition, in which he talks about his own riddling raven, or Hamlet. The Hatter's raven is, I suspect, a close cousin to a bird of Hamlet's, as if in cryptic answer to the Hatter, Hamlet, in Shakespeare, you know him. Hamlet says, I know a hawk from a hacksaw. We could also begin to answer the Hatter's riddle in this way. Both raven and writing desk seem to begin with the letter R when you say them out loud. Raven, writing desk. That takes us away both from writing and the writing and writing desk and brings us to writing, not lefting, but then writing gets us to wronging and wronging gets us back to writing, so we're right or writing desk back where we started. That's complicated, and it sounded complicated in class as well. But that's sort of the point. As Alice begins to understand, what might at first seem like nonsense begins to mean the world when we begin to give it our time. All of which brings me to another kind of time. The time I have spent with my colleagues here at Berkeley has also taught me a tremendous amount. This is what is most humbling about receiving the Distinguished Teaching Award. To work at a place like Berkeley is to work with remarkable teachers. The people I work with in the English department and around the university are models of what it means to have a thoughtful, dedicated, and wise relationship to teaching, I think, as we have seen tonight. Every day I see my colleagues bringing the same intelligence and wit they bring to their research into the classroom and to their work with their students. My colleagues make the hard work of teaching look easy. They make it look easy, but of course it's not easy. Teaching is hard work. It is creative work, it is inspiring work, it is the work that I love, but it is work. And this returns us to how we should understand what it means to spend one's time teaching. As anyone who has been or who has lived with a teacher knows, and I would just like to thank my partner, Kara, who has been in both of these categories. She's a teacher and has lived with one. As anyone who has been or has lived with a teacher knows, for every hour spent in the classroom, there are many more hours spent reading, writing, thinking, planning, and responding to student work. This is especially clear to me because I grew up in a family of teachers. My mother, Francine, is one of the hardest working and one of the best teachers I know. I grew up seeing teachers work. I've seen that work as a child of a teacher, as a student, and now as a teacher myself. I mention all this because teachers' work has been in the news a lot lately, particularly in the context of arguments over the rights of public employees. Often at issue in these arguments is the importance, the quality, even the existence of teachers' work. I wanted in that case to talk about the time of teachers' work because at a moment when the value of that work is being called into question, it seems important to see that when we recognize any teacher, we are recognizing the difficult and necessary work that all kinds of teachers do. So now my time is up, and let me say once again how immensely proud I am to receive this award and how proud I am to be a part of this community. Thank you very much.
With that, I'd like to introduce Alan Mendelson, who's the president of the California Alumni Association, who's had a long-standing affiliation with this program. Alan?
Hello, everybody. This is the second year I've had the honor of being here, and I must say my term as the Alumni Association president is almost over, thank God. And but this is one of the nice events to be part of. And you know, being the leader of the Alumni Association, you think a lot about what it is that connects people to this university. What do we have to do in these times of financial crisis to try and engage alumni to stay connected, to donate money, to be engaged in the university as a lifelong exercise. And when you think about all those things, whether the football team does well or not is clearly a factor. But when you really strip it down and think about what meant something to you as a student, it does come back to the faculty. And for me personally, and I'll divert a little bit to the personal, I'm really, with each of these distinguished teachers, I have a slight connection. With Professor Einhorn, I was really taken by the fact that the course that she teaches is the one that used to be called 17B, History 17B, and I'm really pleased that Leon Litwack is here in the audience someplace, because that gentleman was like the description of the student who didn't even sign up for the course and showed up every week for the lectures. That was what the Leon Litwack's course was to me 40 some odd years ago. And to digress even further, Professor Litwack and I are on the Bancroft Library Friends together, and I didn't know that. I come down, I sit next to this older gentleman. And I came late, like I'm always late, and I sit next to him, and finally he at the break, I see it's Leon Litwack. And I said, holy smokes, and I start bubbling, and I start talking, and you would have thought that this guy was, one of the Hall of Fame football players or basketball players that, that's the way I looked at Leon Litwack. And so if Professor Einhorn carries that tradition and has that same connection with her students as I felt towards Professor Litwack 40 plus years ago, I mean, there's no doubt that you've got the right and three wonderful people up here, but that this whole process of recognizing faculty for their teaching at the university, I just want to compliment the process and the fact that you do honor them today, because they deserve it. And those connections will indeed play back for the university many years down the road, and there's no doubt that we need every connection we can in this time of crisis. So for Professor Geisler, he doesn't know this, but I'm the only non-PhD on the College of Chemistry Advisory Board. It's a long story how I got there. I missed half of the day and a half or day presentations because it's going way over my head. And but I do know from Mike Marletta and Rich Mathis, who were the people who've conned me into being on that advisory board, how much they emphasize the quality of the faculty and how much they have worked so hard to continue to attract and retain the best faculty for the chemistry department and the College of Chemistry, and to get the best graduate students. And that's what makes such a wonderful, again, what distinguishes this university from others. And for Professor Puckett, I can't say that I took a class equivalent to yours. I have read a lot of books out of that period of time. I do speak English, and in fact, despite 4.5 years of taking French, it's still the only language I have any kind of knowledge of. But the fact that you can get the kind of inspiration that you have from your students, again, it's extremely wonderful just to listen to those accolades. So why else am I here? Well, I get to give our three distinguished guests a check. It won't improve their lives very much. It might cover dinner tonight. I'm not even sure of that. But if anything, it's nice to be here and to be able to honor them. So Professor Einhorn. This is on behalf of the Alumni Association, Professor Geisler, Professor Puckett, thank you all.
Can we get you three to stand for just a second? Can we get another round of applause for our three distinguished teachers? Have you ever gone to a concert where you think it's over and all of a sudden the band cranks it up again? Well, I'm about to do that to you. At the beginning of the ceremony, I alluded to the fact that this ceremony is great because it portrays our humanity. But the only way you can be human is if you have a heart. And in our case, a big part of this process has been a fellow named Steve Tollefson. So Steve has shaped us, he's guided us, he's herded us, he develops this process, and he's controlled every step of this process, but he does not control the podium nor the master of ceremonies. So with that, I'd like to invite Steve up. So Steve is the leader of our Office of Educational Development. He's been the primary campus resource for individual faculty seeking to improve their teaching. He's the creator of the influential presidential chairs and lecturers program, the administrator of teaching at listserv, and the lead for the orientation of new faculty each fall coming to our campus. What many of you already know, but some of you don't know, is that Steve will be stepping down as his role in the lead of as the lead of the Office of Educational Development. It's like a partial retirement. Yes, classes will still be taught, the world will still turn, but it will be different. So as faculty, what are we going to do when we have a new professor struggling, where before our answer was always, don't worry, Steve can fix it. That answer may not be there for us any longer. When we ask us, how do we know the answer about something about teaching, we say, we don't know, but Steve will. Well, that won't be there anymore. But the good news is that this is really not a heart failure. It's really a heart transplant, because he's going across the hallway and he'll continue in his role as a lecturer in the comparative lit department and also as part of the program of college writing. So I think I am confident, maybe even arrogant in my assessment, that I know that if we're in time of need, that my guess is we'll just walk across the hall and Steve will know it and he'll fix it one more time. So Steve.
Stop now. Stop. They all got to pull things out of their pockets to read. This is, I don't know what to say. I'll say this. You know, I didn't ever plan to do what I've done with my life. I came to graduate school in English here, knowing that there were no jobs for professors of English in those days. But I was told to go to graduate school if I liked learning about literature, so I did. Then I got a job, and then I got another job. And I have had the most wonderful career imaginable at this university. I can't imagine anyone having a better job than getting to teach and getting to help other people with their teaching. So, you know, I'm a happy camper. It's been just terrific to work with everyone on this campus, and it's a joy every year to have you honored up here, and I love listening to you today. And the Committee on Teaching, for years, as many committee members say, it's the best committee on campus, that they really love it. So all I can say is thank you for all these wonderful years. Thanks a lot.
So with that, I'd like to invite down the past winners of the award. It's sort of a tradition that started last year, so now that we're going to do it twice, it'll become a tradition. So if the past winners of the DTAs are in the audience, if you'd come on down, we'd very much like to have you here. What's that? Okay. You could even stand up too. Or you want to have them sit down? I guess they want them to sit down. Oh, make it a big family. Just let them all stand. Yeah. So with that, we have... So ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Distinguished Teaching Award winners of the UC Berkeley campus that are here tonight. So with that, I'd like to invite you to go to the Alumni House. We're going to be having a reception, and the distinguished teachers will follow shortly. So if you get over there quickly, you can beat them to the food. So thank you very much. We appreciate your attention. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate your love for teaching as well. Thank you.